She came to the auction with only $750 and 3 children in tow. No one wanted this mansion, which had been vacant for over 40 years. Residents turned away, as if the house were cursed. But she took a chance, and discovered what was hidden inside that caused people to disappear. See what happened to the single mother who decided to challenge an entire town. Subscribe, and write in the comments which city you are from. The heat of the late morning clung to every surface in the small town of Red Hill. It pressed down on the courthouse square where townspeople had gathered, their faces shiny with sweat, their bodies shifting in the sluggish rhythm of those who had no desire to be there, but couldn't resist the spectacle. Anticipation hovered over the crowd, like dust stirred by wagon wheels, though no one would admit to curiosity. This was a town where silence was often more powerful than words. Anna Caldwell stood at the edge of the group, her oil-stained canvas tote hanging from one shoulder, her youngest child asleep in a battered stroller at her side. The baby, Sam, had only been in the world a handful of weeks, but his presence seemed to draw every ounce of strength from her body. Beside her, Tommy, just turned 6, shifted impatiently from foot to foot, while Ella, 4 years old and prone to sudden bursts of energy, clutched the handle of the stroller with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. They looked out of place among the farmers in faded denim, the shopkeepers in their pressed shirts, and the few officials in polished shoes. She knew what they were all thinking. A widow, too young to carry so much weight, foolish to bring her children here, desperate if she thought she could claim anything from an auction in this town. The looks said everything the mouths did not. She did not belong, but she had learned over the last year to let those stares slide off her. They had stared at her at the funeral, too, when the coffin was lowered into the dry earth, and whispers said her husband's accident on the construction site was not so accidental. They had stared at her when she returned to the grocery store a week later with 3 children in tow, as though survival itself was an affront. The auctioneer, a man whose voice usually carried the brisk efficiency of habit, called out the first property. His words echoed against the courthouse steps, flat and lifeless, as if he were reading from a script he no longer believed in. Lot number 17, the Sullivan Estate, 12 acres, abandoned residence. Starting bid, $750. The words should have stirred interest. The house was large, known at least by rumor to be one of the grandest homes ever built in the county, stone and timber rising from the hill like something pulled from the earth itself. But no hands went up. The silence was absolute, so deep it seemed to reverberate across the square. People stared at the ground, shifted their weight, avoided one another's eyes. Anna's throat tightened. $750. The sum was almost exactly what remained in her savings account after paying for the funeral, the rent, the endless hospital bills that had come due even after her husband was gone. To spend it all would be reckless. She could barely afford milk and diapers as it was. But when she had read the classified notice, a strange tug had settled in her chest, as though something in that old stone house had whispered her name. Rebuilding something broken, perhaps that was the only way forward after so much loss. The auctioneer repeated himself, his tone edging toward desperation. $750. Do I hear $750? Anyone? Anna's gaze swept the crowd. She saw the unease etched into every face. This wasn't disinterest. It was something closer to fear. No one here wanted to touch the Sullivan property, not because of price, but because of what it carried. She didn't know the full story, but she knew enough to feel the weight of their avoidance. Before she could second-guess herself, her hand went up. Her voice cracked slightly as she forced it into the air. $750. Relief washed over the auctioneer's features like rain after a drought. $750 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 800? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few older men shook their heads. A woman pulled her child closer. Not a single hand rose. Going once, the auctioneer said. His gavel hovered. Going twice. Anna's heart pounded. She almost prayed someone would outbid her, that someone would save her from herself. But the silence remained. Sold, to the lady in the work boots. Just like that, with 3 children pressed against her side, Anna Caldwell became the owner of the Sullivan mansion. The crowd dissolved with unsettling speed. No congratulations, no polite acknowledgments. It was as if her decision carried contagion, and the townspeople could not scatter fast enough. She clutched the handle of the stroller, guiding her children forward as the clerk summoned her to sign the paperwork. The woman behind the table had silver hair coiled neatly at her neck, her lined hands moving with practiced efficiency. When she handed Anna the deed, her fingers lingered on the paper. Her voice dropped to a whisper so faint, Anna almost thought she had imagined it. That place has been empty since '79, not because no one wanted it, but because no one was allowed to have it. Anna froze. What do you mean? The clerk's eyes flicked nervously to the people drifting away. Her mouth tightened. Nothing, dear. Just mind the plumbing. 40 years does things to pipes. She stamped the final page so forcefully the sound made Ella jump. The conversation was over. Keys cold in her palm, Anna stepped onto the courthouse stairs. The town stretched before her in the haze of midday. A single stoplight, the general store with its dusty windows, the brick facade of the bank gleaming with an artificial pride, and the campaign posters plastered across the real estate office. Franklin Pierce's face smiled from every corner. A mayor who had ruled Red Hill so long, his name seemed carved into the land itself. As though summoned by thought, the office door opened. A tall man emerged, his suit too crisp for this place, his shoes polished to a city shine. He paused, saw her, and altered his path. His smile was wide but lifeless. "You must be our auction winner," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Everett Pierce, deputy mayor, head of Pierce Realty." Anna's grip was calloused from years of washing dishes and fixing what little her husband had left behind. The contrast made her stomach twist. "I'm sorry about your loss," Everett continued smoothly. Frank Caldwell was a fine worker. His gaze sharpened. "So, you're the new owner of the old Sullivan place. Bold choice for a young mother with responsibilities." His eyes flicked toward the stroller. "I like fixing broken things," Anna said. "Some things can't be fixed," he replied, his smile curdling. "Some things were never meant to be disturbed." He slipped a business card into her hand. "When you decide it's too much, and you will, give me a call. I'll take it off your hands." He walked away before she could answer, leaving the weight of his words coiled in her chest. The drive from the courthouse to the Sullivan property carried her away from Red Hill's small comforts. Asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to dirt, the road climbing into the foothills, where cactus and rock replaced farmland. The children grew quiet, lulled by the rhythm of the ride. Anna's mind wrestled with her decision. She had spent everything, risked everything, and for what? Then the house appeared. It rose from the land as though the hill itself had shaped it. Native stone stacked into walls that glowed golden in the slanting light. Timber beams weathered but strong. Chimneys like sentinels against the sky. The wraparound porch sagged. Ivy strangled the eastern wall. Weeds clawed through the stone walkway. Yet it was beautiful, almost painfully so. Tommy pressed his nose against the window. "It looks like a castle," he breathed. To Anna, it looked like a promise and a threat bound together. She parked in the circular drive, hands gripping the wheel until her knuckles whitened. Her grandfather's voice echoed in memory. Sometimes the only way to fix something is to take it completely apart. See what's broken at the foundation. She had not understood it then. She did now. The door groaned open with startling ease. The key turned smoothly, as if the lock had been oiled yesterday. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. A grand staircase curled upward like a question mark. Crystal chandeliers sagged beneath webs. Furniture sat beneath yellowing sheets, frozen in time. But it was the kitchen that stopped her breath. A cast-iron telephone clung to the wall, and beside it hung a calendar. July 1979. The 17th circled in thick red ink. She brushed dust from the date with trembling fingers. The baby stirred in the stroller. Ella yawned. Tommy darted down the hallway shouting about hidden treasure. The house, it seemed, had been waiting for them all this time. That night, she did not dare sleep within its walls. She tucked the children into blankets in the truck, cradled the baby against her chest, and stared at the dark silhouette of the mansion under the Arizona stars. Fear and resolve mingled in her veins. She was the owner of the Sullivan estate now. Whatever secrets had silenced this house for 40 years, she would face them. For her husband, for her children, for herself. The house loomed against the night, silent and watchful, as though it too were waiting to see what kind of woman she would prove to be. The first night spent in the truck outside the mansion left Anna stiff and aching. But as dawn stretched pale light across the hills, she forced herself to stand and look at the stone structure that now belonged to her. The children were still asleep, tangled in blankets on the back seat, their breathing steady and innocent. Sam stirred in his stroller, whimpering until she leaned close to soothe him. It would have been easier to turn the key in the ignition and drive away, leaving this place to its silence and secrets. But there was no going back to their rented apartment in Phoenix. No going back to a life without risk. This house, for better or worse, was now their home. She carried the baby inside first, settling him in a makeshift crib fashioned from a dresser drawer, padded with blankets. Tommy and Ella followed, their excitement cutting through the dust and gloom. They ran from room to room with the reckless joy of children who saw only adventure, not the shadows lingering in corners. Anna let them explore within sight, choosing one upstairs bedroom that had the least cobwebs and a window still capable of opening. She scrubbed it until her fingers ached, layering sheets across the floor so the children could sleep away from the grime. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Day by day, she tried to impose order on the chaos. She cleaned with buckets of water carried from the small pond she discovered near the edge of the property. She hung linens in the sun until the scent of mildew lessened. She set the children to simple tasks. Ella folding rags, Tommy sweeping with a broom far too large for him. They laughed, argued, tired quickly, but it gave them purpose. Sam slept and woke in his own rhythm, his cries echoing through the cavernous rooms like the voice of a spirit refusing silence. Yet with every attempt to build normalcy, Anna felt the eyes of the town pressing in. At the grocery store, the cashier froze when Anna mentioned the Sullivan place, then rang up her items in silence. At the hardware store, where she hoped to find tools for repairs, the owner grew suddenly busy, muttering excuses until she left empty-handed. Conversations halted when she entered the diner with the children, resuming only after she passed. They weren't shunning her poverty or her widowhood. They were shunning the house itself, as if to acknowledge it was to invite misfortune. Inside the mansion, she began to notice things that gnawed at her mind. The blueprint she had retrieved from the courthouse showed clean symmetry. East and west wings balanced, hallways aligned. But in reality, the corridors twisted in odd directions, some ending at walls where doors should have been. Tommy insisted he heard footsteps at night behind his bedroom wall, steady and slow. Anna assured him it was nothing more than the settling of an old structure, but unease took root in her own chest. Her discovery came late one evening when Ella fell asleep clutching a book she had dragged from the downstairs shelves. Anna tried to replace it, but the line of volumes seemed strange. Some bore thick layers of dust, but others were oddly clean, as though touched recently. She pressed her palm against the frame, and a faint gyve beneath her hand startled her. The bookshelf shifted. She pushed harder. With a creak that sent shivers through her spine, the entire case swung outward on a hidden pivot, revealing a narrow hallway swallowed in darkness. For a long moment she stood frozen, the air heavy with the scent of stale wood and forgotten years. The children slept upstairs, oblivious. Clutching a flashlight, she stepped inside. The passage led to a series of rooms sealed away from the rest of the house. Dust lay undisturbed across every surface, thick as snow, webs draped from ceiling to floor. These spaces had not been touched in decades, unlike the rest of the mansion where someone, somehow, had maintained minimal care. Here the air felt heavy, almost funereal. At the far end, she pushed open a door and found herself in a study larger even than the main office she had already seen. A heavy Persian rug blanketed the floor, muted colors beneath years of dirt. Bookcases lined the walls from baseboard to ceiling, crammed with volumes on law, government, property rights. And at the center, beneath the dust, stood a desk of rich mahogany. Her breath caught as she opened the top drawer. A leather-bound journal lay within, its pages filled with neat, careful handwriting. She flipped through until her eyes fixed on the final entry. The date was July 16th, 1979. The day before the calendar in the kitchen had been circled. The word sent a chill through her. Pierce has gone too far. 37 illegal transfers, all documentation ready. Tomorrow I present everything to Judge Holloway. He believes his connections will protect him, but he is wrong. This ends now. Anna sank into the dust-covered chair, the journal trembling in her hands. Harold Sullivan had been preparing to expose corruption, to drag the mayor's name into court. Tomorrow never came. Sullivan had vanished, and the house had been left to rot. The silence of the town suddenly made sense. They weren't just afraid of ghosts. They were afraid of the truth buried here. She carried the journal upstairs, sliding it beneath the mattress where the children slept. She lay awake most of the night, every creak of the house sounding like a footstep, every whisper of wind like a warning. The following day she drove into town, determined to stock up on supplies. She walked into the diner with the children in tow, ordered coffee and a sandwich, while they shared a plate of fries. The waitress smiled politely until Anna mentioned she was working on the Sullivan property. The smile faltered, and the woman leaned close. "You're brave," she whispered, then quickly retreated to refill another customer's cup. Brave, not foolish. Brave, not welcome. On the walk back to her truck, Anna froze. Tucked beneath the windshield wiper was an envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore the words typed in sharp black letters. Some things are better left alone. Leave well enough alone. Her pulse thundered as she crumpled the note. Ella tugged at her skirt, asking why she looked so pale. Anna forced a smile, buckled the children into the truck, and drove back to the mansion. Anger burned through her fear. Whoever thought she would be frightened into abandoning the only home she could offer, her children clearly did not know her. That night, she heard the low rumble of an engine outside. Peering through the window, she saw headlights paused at the edge of the drive. The car remained for long minutes, unmoving, before finally reversing down the hill. She stood at the window long after it vanished, arms folded, the baby's soft breathing behind her, like a fragile anchor. She had come to Red Hill seeking a place to rebuild her life, a refuge for her children. Instead, she had inherited the unfinished battle of a man who had died, trying to reveal the town's darkest secret. The Sullivan mansion was no mere ruin. It was a vault, and someone powerful still wanted that vault sealed. Anna kissed each of her children's foreheads as they slept, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Then she returned to the hidden study, flashlight in hand, and stared at the rug that covered most of the floor. There was more here. She could feel it. And though her heart thudded like a warning drum, she knew she would keep pulling back the layers until every secret was uncovered. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both fragile and exhausting. Anna rose early to tend to Sam, whose cries echoed through the cavernous rooms before dawn. Tommy and Ella would tumble sleepily from their makeshift beds and follow her downstairs, dragging blankets behind them, their little feet padding across the dusty floorboards. She kept herself moving constantly, cleaning, repairing, cooking simple meals on the temperamental old stove, telling herself that busy hands left no room for fear. Yet the fear remained, rising in quiet hours, whispering in the creaks of the house. It did not take long for the town to press back against her presence in the mansion. 2 men from the county arrived one afternoon with clipboards in hand, their uniforms bearing the official seal, but their eyes sharp with something colder than procedure. They introduced themselves as inspectors, sent to determine whether the property was fit for habitation. Their questions focused less on plumbing and wiring than on the children. Did they have their own rooms? Were there safety hazards? Were the staircases secure? Anna sensed the true motive immediately. They wanted grounds to declare the home unfit, to open the door for child services to intervene. She walked them through every room with calm she did not feel, pointing out the steps she had already taken, the repairs she was making. They left with no clear accusation, but with thin smiles that told her the visit had been a warning more than an inspection. In town, whispers grew louder. At the grocery store, she overheard 2 women muttering that the young widow was endangering her children in a house where no one decent had lived for 40 years. At the diner, a man at the counter remarked too loudly that people who stirred up old dirt tended to regret it. Even at the post office, where she hoped for neutrality, Hector the clerk shifted uncomfortably when she walked in, glancing at her children with pity before turning his back. She knew what was happening, a campaign of doubt, of isolation, designed to crush her before she even understood what she was fighting. It was during these tense days that she returned to the hidden study. The Persian rug weighed heavy under her hands as she pulled it back, revealing the outline of a trapdoor set into the hardwood floor. The brass handle gleamed strangely, as though polished recently, and her heart thudded as she gripped it. With a hiss of air, the door lifted, revealing a wooden staircase descending into darkness. She hesitated, thinking of the children asleep upstairs, then steadied herself and began the descent. The basement was unlike the rest of the house, where dust and neglect reigned above. Here, order and preservation dominated. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with years and property names in meticulous handwriting. A table stood at the center, and atop it lay an open box filled with files, deeds, and clippings. She leafed through them with trembling hands, and with each page, the story sharpened into something more horrifying. The Alvarez Ranch, 1979. Documents showed a transfer of 200 acres for a fraction of their worth, signed by Miguel Alvarez. Yet a note in the margin written by Harold Sullivan revealed the truth. Miguel had been in Mexico burying his mother the day the papers were allegedly signed. The signature was a forgery. The original deed was missing from county records. Page after page told similar stories, families pressured, signatures falsified, land stolen through cunning and intimidation. Names recurred: Horizon Ventures, Valley Development, each tracing back in tangled lines to the same men. And at the center, again and again, Franklin Pierce. Her breath caught when she found more recent papers records that touched on her own life. A development plan bearing her husband's name, scrawled in the margins. Notes that he had witnessed discrepancies on a construction site. Murmurs of him asking questions he shouldn't. The accident that had killed him, the scaffolding collapse that had been written off as bad luck, now reeked of something darker. Her stomach twisted as realization struck. Her husband's death was not an isolated tragedy, but another thread in the web woven by Pierce. She returned to the surface with the box clutched against her chest, her mind a storm of fury and grief. She wanted to scream at the walls, to shout the truth to the silent town below. Instead, she hid the files beneath her mattress and lay awake, listening to every sigh of the old house, wondering how far Pierce's reach extended and how soon it would close around her. The answer came sooner than she feared. One night, as the children slept in the upstairs room, and she sat at the kitchen table reading through Sullivan's journal again, a faint crackle reached her ears. At first she thought it was the house settling, but then the smell of smoke curled beneath the door. She rushed outside to find her old truck engulfed in flames, fire chewing through the rusted metal with unnatural speed. She pulled the children from their beds, carrying Sam in her arms, while Tommy and Ella stumbled after her, their faces pale with terror. Together they stood in the yard, the fire painting their faces orange as the truck collapsed into molten ruin. It was no accident. She had seen the shadows of men retreating into the darkness, their footsteps quick and deliberate. Someone had come to deliver a message, and that message was clear. Leave, or the fire would not stop with her vehicle. The next morning, exhaustion gnawed at her, but she refused to yield. She remembered a name her husband had spoken years ago, a retired sheriff who had been his friend, a man who had left the force under circumstances never fully explained. Dean Talbot. If anyone knew what lay behind the Pierce family's iron grip on Red Hill, it would be him. The drive to Clayton Ridge took less than an hour, but every mile felt heavy with risk. She glanced in the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting to see dark vehicles following. But the road behind her remained empty, the desert stretching endless and silent. She carried the children with her, unwilling to leave them behind, and they dozed in the back seat, unaware of the storm tightening around their mother. Dean Talbot's house was modest, its yard neat, a flag fluttering faintly in the dry breeze. The man who answered the door was tall, his frame lean with the residue of years in uniform, his hair gray, but his posture straight. He looked at her with surprise that shifted into recognition. "You're Frank Caldwell's girl," he said at last, his voice rough with age and memory. You've got his eyes. Inside, the house was lined with photographs of fishing trips and law enforcement days long gone. The air smelled of coffee and pipe tobacco, familiar scents that grounded Anna even as her nerves frayed. She laid out everything, her purchase of the mansion, the unease in town, the secret wing, the journal, the hidden basement filled with evidence. She spoke of the threats, the fire, the weight of corruption pressing against her. Dean listened in silence, his face hardening with each word. At last he rose and left the room, returning with a cardboard box thick with dust. He set it on the table between them and opened it to reveal maps, photocopied deeds, letters, all scrawled with red pen. Names connected by arrows, properties linked in tangled webs. "I started digging 30 years ago," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "They warned me off. My wife left me. The department told me to stand down. But I never threw it away. Couldn't. Now you've stumbled into the same nest of vipers." Together they pored over the papers, and Anna saw the same pattern Sullivan had traced: fraud, intimidation, theft stretching across decades. Dean's finger tapped a particular set of documents. Harold Sullivan was ready to bring it all to light. That's why he disappeared. And if your husband saw too much... He let the thought hang heavy in the air. Anna's hands clenched into fists. They took everything from him, from us. I can't walk away now. Dean studied her, his expression one of weary respect. Then you need allies outside this county, someone who can't be silenced. I know a reporter. Tough, relentless. If you want to finish what Sullivan started, she's your best chance. As Anna drove back to the mansion that evening, the desert fading into twilight, her children murmured sleepily in the back seat, their small heads resting against each other. She felt the enormity of what lay ahead pressing against her chest, the certainty that every step forward brought them deeper into danger. Yet beneath the fear, there burned a core of resolve. The fire had destroyed her truck. The threat circled closer, but she would not bend. She had inherited not just a house, but a legacy of unfinished justice. The noose was tightening, but she had chosen her place within it. She would not run. Not anymore. The drive back from Clayton Ridge felt longer than the hour it should have taken. The desert stretched wider, and the sky pressed lower as Anna guided the car along the uneven roads. Dean's words still echoed in her mind, his files lying on the seat beside her, heavy with decades of unspoken truths. In the rearview mirror, Tommy and Ella leaned against each other, asleep, while Sam stirred restlessly in his carrier. Their innocence was almost unbearable against the weight of what she carried. She had come to Red Hill seeking only shelter for her family, but the Sullivan mansion had given her more than crumbling walls and broken beams. It had given her a legacy of unfinished justice, and it demanded she decide whether to flee or to fight. The next morning, her decision was forced. News crackled from the small radio in the kitchen as she brewed weak coffee, her eyes still heavy from another sleepless night. Mayor Franklin Pierce stood behind a podium, his voice practiced, carrying the authority of 10 terms in office. He spoke of pride, of heritage, of preserving the past for the children of Red Hill. He spoke of the Sullivan Mansion as though it already belonged to the town, a jewel to be restored under his initiative. Anna felt the chill run through her as the words sank in. It wasn't merely suggestion. It was preparation. They were laying the foundation to take the house from her legally, to erase her presence, just as they had erased Harold Sullivan's. She dressed in her grandfather's old canvas jacket, the one with his name stitched across the back, a shield of memory and defiance. With her children gathered close, she returned to the mansion, her steps heavy but unyielding. A black SUV idled down the hill, its windows dark, the watchers within making no attempt to hide their surveillance. She ignored them, carried her supplies inside, and began scrubbing the floors. The sound of a radio filled the rooms, her voice rising in songs with Ella as they polished the glass of chandeliers, making the house shine as though life had truly returned to its walls. To any observer, she was simply a woman restoring an old property. But each sweep of her hand mapped escape routes. Each placement of furniture created cover. Each step she took claimed the house more firmly as her own. Around noon came the knock at the door. Sheriff Denton stood there in pressed uniform, his expression neutral, his eyes empty of warmth. He asked to step inside, citing coyote sightings and the need to check remote properties. She allowed him, though she knew the pretext was thin. He moved through the house with the air of a man searching for something he already expected to find. His gaze lingered too long on walls that hid passages. His hand rested too easily on his holster. He mentioned the mayor's generous offer, the importance of community, the rhythms of a town that did not tolerate disruption. She met his stare evenly, speaking of her grandfather's lessons, of engines and their truths, of how tampering always left marks. A flicker crossed his face then, a brief crack in the mask, before he left with another warning dressed as concern. She stood at the window long after he disappeared, watching him confer with the men in the waiting vehicle. The message was clear. The law was not hers to rely on. Every channel of power answered to Pierce. She was alone, save for the children who depended on her, and for the brittle alliance of Dean Talbot and the reporter he had promised to connect her with. That night, she locked the doors, slid the heavy bolt across the cellar entrance, and whispered promises to her sleeping children that she would keep them safe. Her eyes never closed fully, even as exhaustion dragged her into restless dreams. The following evening, the council meeting filled the town hall. Anna sat in the back. The children left with a trusted neighbor, her presence alone a statement. Mayor Pierce spoke with eloquence, weaving words of heritage and pride, his voice rising with the practiced rhythm of a man who had dominated the town for 40 years. He painted pictures of tourism, of restored landmarks, of Red Hill thriving as a place that honored its past. The Sullivan Mansion was named directly, its walls described as a treasure, its land as sacred to the town's history. 4 council members raised their hands in swift agreement. Only Eleanor Winters hesitated. She sat with composed face, her hand resting on the table, her silence stretching into the charged air. The mayor prompted her gently at first, then with sharper edge. Still, she did not raise her hand. Instead, she spoke of environmental concerns, of the need for assessments, of the responsibility to ensure that heritage didn't come at the cost of the land. Her words were firm, her tone steady, and though murmurs rippled through the hall, she did not waver. She moved to table the vote, and though the mayor's face tightened, he could not deny the council's procedure. The initiative would wait a week. Anna saw the cold fury in Everett Pierce's eyes as they swept the crowd and settled on her. She had forced them to stumble, if only for days. The reprieve was fragile, but it was hers. She slipped outside after the meeting, following Eleanor into the cool night. The councilwoman's hands shook as she fumbled with her keys, her face pale beneath the street lamps. She admitted in low voice that Pierce had already threatened audits, inspections, anything to crush her family's preserve. But she also admitted she had no choice. A vote for him would have destroyed them anyway. Anna touched her arm, thanking her quietly, both women aware that targets had been painted on their backs. The threat revealed itself that very night. As Anna drove home, headlights followed at measured distance. She turned through back streets, circled blocks, and still they remained. She led them not to the garage, not to the mansion, but to the diner, blazing with neon light and crowded with townsfolk. She parked beneath the sign, walked inside, and sat at the counter in plain sight. Through the window, she saw the SUV wait, unwilling to enter where witnesses gathered. Sheriff Denton entered minutes later, his eyes sweeping the room before he ordered his meal. She knew then that every step she took was observed, catalogued, weighed. When she finally left, she had witnesses to her surveillance, and that was the only shield she could raise for now. The reprieve did not last. At dawn, 2 nights later, she woke to the crack of breaking glass. Smoke rolled thick into the apartment above her grandfather's garage, flames devouring curtains and climbing walls. She snatched Sam from his crib, shook Tommy and Ella awake, and forced them down the back staircase. The fire spread too quickly, tongues of heat licking the ceiling, fueled by accelerants that left no chance of containment. They stumbled into the yard, coughing and terrified as the building that had held her childhood memories burned to ruin. Fire trucks arrived late, their sirens splitting the night, but it was already too late. Denton stood nearby, his expression carved of stone, his words cold. Accidents happened in garages full of fuel. Anna clutched her children against her chest as she watched everything collapse. Her grandfather's legacy, her safe refuge, gone in a blaze designed to erase not just her sanctuary, but her spirit. Yet as tears streaked her soot-stained face, resolve hardened inside her. They had tried to scare her. They had tried to silence her. They had underestimated the strength of a mother who had nothing left to lose. By the following morning, she had carried her surviving files into the mansion itself, hiding them in compartments the Pierces had never found, and she had called the reporter Dean had recommended. Mara Delgado listened with sharp silence as Anna explained everything, her voice unbroken, despite the smoke still clinging to her clothes. The evidence was real, the threats undeniable, and now the story was in motion beyond the borders of Red Hill. The week that followed stretched taut as a wire. The council prepared to reconvene. The mayor moved with increasing desperation, and whispers spread through town like wind before a storm. Anna moved between the mansion and the temporary lodging she found for her children, never resting, never trusting. She knew the Pierces would strike again. She knew that the final vote would decide whether the mansion remained hers or whether the town itself would devour her along with it. When the night came, the hall was filled to bursting. Franklin Pierce delivered his speech with fire, but cracks showed in his veneer. Eleanor Winters sat resolute, the townspeople restless with unease. And in the back, Anna watched with arms folded, her eyes unflinching. She was not only defending a house, she was defending the truth buried beneath its foundations, the voices silenced for decades, the justice that men like Pierce had thought they could bury forever. The days of silence were ending. The Sullivan mansion stood tall against the rising storm, and with it stood Anna Caldwell, widow, mother, fighter. She had walked into this place a desperate woman clinging to hope. She now stood within it as the barrier between corruption and its reckoning. And though the flames had already taken so much, though danger coiled at every door, she knew she would not yield. Because some homes were more than shelter. Some homes were battlefields. And some homes demanded that those who entered them find the strength to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Take a moment to watch our other videos for more powerful stories still to come. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Some stories are too important to keep to yourself.